All right. So here we go. My name is JD Cameron. I'm here with Ethan Moore, who has recently taken a position with the Twins front office. Ethan, welcome and thank you so much for taking some time for us today.
Hey there. Yeah, thanks for having me.
For sure. So Ethan, Twins fans are going to be excited to hear from someone who works in a front office, and that's a position that I think most folks don't really have a good conception of. So we're grateful for your time, and we're excited to learn more about you. So I'd love to start off just by getting to know you a little better. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from, and how did you get into baseball?
All right, cool. Yeah. So I'm from the Denver, Colorado area originally. That's where I grew up. That is where I went to high school. Um, and then I went out to school in California at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo for the majority of the last 4 years, I guess. Started there in 2017. And yeah, I got into baseball as a young fan. The Colorado Rockies made a really great run in 2007, made it all the way to the World Series, kind of eclipsing anything that franchise had done before. And as an 8-year-old young kid, that was really awesome for me. So that's when I got into baseball. And, I just kind of kept following baseball and was always kind of a numbers guy. As you know, you'll hear a lot of that kind of thing from people who do what I do. You got to love the numbers. Um, and yeah, so that's kind of how I became really interested in using numbers to learn more about baseball.
Got it. Love it. So, one thing I think that fans should know about you and that I think is really fascinating is that you have this blog, right, which kind of charts your journey in looking for work in a baseball front office. So, where did your passion for the statistical side of the game come from, and why did you decide to kind of chart that journey in the way that you did?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I knew that I wanted to work for a baseball team in kind of the front office type role pretty early on, probably when I was like a senior in high school. Um, and I kind of did some research on, what do I need to do to be competitive for a job like that. And it turned out that something that you can do to kind of put yourself ahead or to kind of help your case is to just do research, do projects, just to kind of showcase your abilities and just put it out there for anyone to go look at. So that's what I was doing. Um, I started that blog, I believe, in the summer of 2018. Um, Actually, it might have been the summer of 2019. You can go back and look at the stamps. Not quite sure, but yeah. So it started off. The stuff was really not very good, um, and over time, I think that you could see the complexity of the types of questions that I was trying to answer, um, and I hope the quality of the work improve over time. So it was really just kind of like a portfolio of my work, but it got kind of a bigger following than I was expecting when I started out.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that was something that I wanted to ask you about too. Um, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about how you grew into like a greater and greater level of expertise with analytics and some of the skill sets that feed into that. And the reason I'm asking is it seems like a very like notable and obvious choice you make on your blog to like call out your failures or where things went wrong in a way that I think like makes it really approachable because I think for a lot of folks that don't have that background or don't have those skill sets, it can seem a little out of reach. So can you talk a little bit more about kind of your evolution in some of those skill sets? And I'm thinking of folks who might be in high school or college now who might be interested in like pursuing a similar path. What are some of the integral skill sets they need in order to set them up for success?
It's a good question. Yeah, I grew a lot just by kind of observing other people, looking at doing a lot of reading of things that other people were putting out. It's something that to this day I still spend a lot of time like scouring, the internet to find other people's work that I'm interested in, and then eventually, once you do that enough, you kind of start to kind of take pieces and parts that you think are interesting or that you think you would do differently or something like that, and it kind of just all comes together. But I want to emphasize that that kind of thing does not happen overnight. If you look at the timestamps on the blog post that I did and a lot of the work that I had done, it's like years. Like it's not something that and I'm still improving all the time. But sometimes I wish that I was more productive or that I was growing, at a faster rate. And it's easy to kind of look back and be like, oh, this happened overnight. But it really didn't. It takes a good amount of time.
For sure. And that is absolutely evident from reading your work, just how much of a journey that's been for you. It was fascinating to kind of read through that. Ethan, you also mentioned your college experience. If I'm correct in my homework, you were a student manager for the Cal Poly team, who
Yep.
have a great program. And what was that like, and what was some of your key learnings from the years that you were involved with the baseball team at Cal Poly?
Yeah, so I was the head student manager at Cal Poly. I'm repping the team
Very
right now with my hat. Yeah, that experience was really awesome for me. When I showed up, they didn't really have much of a program for or much of an opportunity for student managers, undergraduate students to contribute to the team by using numbers to help the team win, which is kind of what I'm all about. And over time, I was able to kind of create that role for myself and start to kind of make what I wanted it to be was like a mini MLB front office. It's like we have access to this team. We have all these cool players. We are playing, 50 games a season. Like, it's just kind of like a little mini MLB team. You could think of it that way. So
Yep.
we ended up getting I ended up recruiting a bunch more people to be on my team. Other student managers to kind of help keep up with the demand that the coaches were asking for of like information that they wanted us to provide, which was very exciting that they wanted that information, but also overwhelming because they were asking for a lot of it. So yeah, my final season with the team was 2020, which kind of got cut short due to COVID. And I kind of just passed it on to the next most senior managers who were there, and they're doing a great job this season. So yeah, it was a really great experience to just basically practice being in a front office and doing what front office people do, but at a much smaller scale.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, I know a lot of folks are gonna know or are gonna want to know about how you got connected with the Twins. So I guess my first question here is kind of what drew you to this organization in the first place?
So, I wanted to work in baseball, and early on I didn't really care what team I worked for, right? It was just kind of like if anyone offered me a job, and I think a lot of people feel this way, right? It's like if
Yep.
anyone offered me a job in baseball to work in a front office, like I would take that.
Yep.
As I kind of went through the process a few times, this year was my third time going through, like the third season going through the kind of hiring process, for a lot of teams that have similar opportunities, kind of internship type things. I kind of started to parse, what do I like in an organization, what do I not like in an organization, just kind of like my preferences. And the Twins I found, they have a kind of an established commitment to using analytics, which is what I do, right? So it's like my number one thing if I'm an analyst is I would like the team to use what I work on 40 hours a week or more, right? And I don't think that's too much to ask. I think anybody in their job, wants their work to mean something. So there are some teams that I think don't value analytics as much in kind of like their processes, which is totally up to them. But for me, I was like, I would prefer to go to a place that kind of has this established history of of valuing the kind of work that I do. So that was a big part of it for me.
Got it. I got to tell you, Ethan, that's going to be music to fans' ears to hear because it's not necessarily always been the way with the Twins. So that's really exciting. I know when I first reached out to you, you hadn't yet started. And so if I'm inferring correctly, you've started like in recent weeks. So how have your first few weeks with the organization been? And what have you been up to so far?
Yeah, so I'm currently in my 4th week with the team. It's been great. I mean, this is something that I've looked forward to for a long time. This was kind of like the goal, was to get to this point. So it's very cool to finally kind of see what's going on the inside. I can't say too much, but I've gotten my first project, and it's kind of adding on to the work that a lot of the great work that's already been done in prior seasons. And it's honestly it's going a little bit slow. There's a lot to learn, and kind of I was in my own world for so long, just doing stuff on my own, and now it's like I'm part of a big team who we're all trying to do stuff at the same time. So there's all these processes that I obviously just need to get I need to get acclimated with. But that's kind of how it would be joining any organization, from being a college kid to now having a real job. So it's just kind of that stuff. But it has been really cool. I've just been learning a lot for sure.
Cool. I actually kind of want to hone in on something you said previously, Ethan, because one kind of commonality that's come out of hearing about the Twins organization since Falvey and Levine took over is this idea or sense of like communal culture, shared ownership, like everybody's ideas matter. Is that something that has been part of your experience so far? And is that something that you got a sense of during the hiring process?
Yeah, I think already it's kind of been hammered home that this group, this front office is, they intend to, hear everyone's voices and intend to kind of like integrate everyone's ideas, or at least consider them. So yeah, that's definitely another thing. I know a lot of, or not a lot, but I know of some front offices that are pretty hierarchical, from what I've heard, where it's kind of like the people who have been there the longest have this status, and then the next group of people have this status. And if you're at the bottom, it's tough to kind of feel like your work is impacting what's going on at the higher levels. And so far, I have not gotten that sense from the Twins at all.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, so again, in my homework, I was listening to you talk a little bit about pitch design on another podcast. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that with some of your work that's out there and charted on your blog. If I can navigate that as a non-sabermetrician, I will do my best. So a project that you've kind of had out there is this XRV3. And so I'm wondering if you could, from my readings of that, there were kind of like 3 different iterations of that project that you went through. Could you outline for folks in kind of layperson's terms what your goal was in that project, and just a little bit of background about that work, because I think it's really, really fascinating.
Yeah, of course. So the idea behind this project that I started kind of, I think it was in March of 2020. So kind of like my quarantine project, was let's try to put a number on every single pitch that's thrown in a game, in a season. And just basically like, how good is this pitch, or how not good is this pitch? In baseball, the way that the kind of units are like runs. That's what you need to score to win the game. So for pitching, you want your pitches to be worth fewer runs, right? Because you're trying to prevent runs from scoring. So I kind of started out with this very crude method of assigning every pitch a value, and the good ones would have a low value and the bad ones would have a high value, kind of like ERA.
Yep.
And I kind of over time figured out, okay, this method that I did really did not, it wasn't very good. So I tried again, and then that one was better, but also not as good. And then I ended up with this third iteration that I spent most of this January on, just kind of trying to get it finished before I started here with the twins. And it was an improvement over the second one. So I still don't think that it's like great or that it's the, you know, final version or as good as it could be, but I just kind of have to leave it there for now while I'm working here with the twins, which is totally fine. But yeah, basically the idea was just like, how good are these pitches? And then you could look at, you know, an individual pitcher and say how on average, how good are his pitches by this metric, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, awesome, love it. As something I was wondering while I'm listening to you talk about that project is, you've kind of talked about and referred to the set of underlying skills. I think that, again, on another podcast, I mentioned you, or I heard you mention teaching yourself to code, and kind of learning that skill set. But I'm also thinking about finding and asking the right questions and interesting questions. Which of those do you see as more important for someone that's kind of eager to do this work? Is it the technical skill set, or is it the generation of the project and how that comes about?
That's a good question. I think it's hard. It's hard to say. It's not really something where it's like either or. It's probably, a mix of both. I will say that my technical skills have kind of already been put to the test. Not every front office job is an analyst role. Mine is an analyst role, so that is basically like I'm basically just coding like all the time. So if you're not super strong with coding, either you're probably not going to get the position, or you're going to get good at coding very fast by kind of being thrown into the fire, which is what I'm kind of doing now. But I think the other side of things, kind of the creativity of generating ideas and also asking the right questions, I think that's important too. I don't have as good of it's that's harder to measure, so I don't know kind of where I stand. I don't know if that's a strength or a weakness of mine. I typically think that I am pretty good at just asking questions in general. I think I ask so many questions that some of them are bound to be good, and I just try to not embarrass myself with the bad ones. But yeah, no, that's also a big, very important part of what we do as well.
For sure. Ethan, I gotta ask you because I'm nosy on Twitter, and I've noticed that you've been a guest on all kinds of interesting podcasts and shows recently, and also can't help but notice that you and Saris have been back and forth a lot recently, and seemingly in some collaboration. How did you get connected with him, and what is the extent, if any, of work that you two have done together?
Yes. So this is related to the XRV project that I was working on. Um, he has, so Enos Harris writes for The Athletic, and he has kind of um, like a series, I guess, during the MLB season. That's like the pitchers who are leading in the stats that categorize command, like their ability to throw the ball where they want to, and then their stuff, which is just kind of a blanket metric for like kind of how nasty your pitches are, or how hard they look to hit, I guess. So anyway, Eno approached me about creating a metric, or I ended up basically just tweaking this XRV metric so that it would try to quantify how good each pitcher's stuff was. So it has a very similar methodology, but he and I kind of collaborated. I was technically a research assistant for The Athletic for a bit, so I could contribute to his series there, and then he used someone else's metric for quantifying command. I don't remember who that was. So yeah, that's what that was. And the opportunity to work with him was awesome. He's one of my favorite writers and has been for a long time. So the ability to, or the opportunity to work with him was really cool.
Very, very cool. Okay. I also have I put out into Twitter yesterday a call for questions. So some readers responded, and I'm wondering if I can throw a few questions your way that folks are wondering about what it's like to work in a front office and just your general analytical take on things, with the caveat that like don't answer anything that you don't want to or you feel like you shouldn't. Um,
Okay.
so someone tweeted and asked, what do you feel like the value of analytics is for hitting, for pitching, and for fielding? Do you think there is kind of more statistical value in one of those areas, and why?
So I was pitching, fielding, and hitting, right? Okay, so well, this is my, this is my opinion, not the Twins' opinion at all. Um, Personally, I have not been super interested in fielding, in the applications of fielding. I think for me, like there aren't that many balls in play, and there are fewer balls in play. As the years as the years go on. Um, so for me, it's like I can't really get too excited about fielding analytics because the ball's just not in play enough for me to feel like it's worth it to spend a bunch of time on that. So if you go back and look at my previous work, there's almost nothing on fielding in there. Um, I personally have been a little bit more interested in pitching analytics. I think that that's just because that data on pitching is much more widely available um, to the public than hitting data is. And, even hitting, it's like the ball, that's still having to do with like the ball in play isn't really, is kind of decreasing over time. So pitchers are always they're throwing a pitch on every pitch, obviously. So they're always involved in the action. So um, pitching seems like it's been ahead of hitting for a while now, in terms of like how that group is using data to improve and gain an advantage. So honestly, I don't really see that switching anytime soon. So I would probably say that pitching analytics are probably still going to be ahead of hitting and fielding analytics in terms of like how helpful they are um, to analyze, I guess.
Sure. I mean, it makes sense, right? The pitcher is the person in the game who is like initiating the play for
Yeah,
the time. So I hear that.
they're in control. Yeah.
Um, okay, someone else says, or someone else asks, potentially a helicopter parent, if you could give 12-year-old you a blueprint for how to get into this work, what would you recommend for them to do?
Man, I mean, I think I kind of developed and followed a blueprint pretty early, which may be a good thing, maybe a bad thing, but um, I mean, I think you need to enjoy, or maybe not need to, but for me to do this job, I need to enjoy the kind of math and science behind it. Um,
Hmm.
I didn't really, I was just good at math growing up. That was just something that one of my favorite subjects. And then about my second year of high school, I started getting very, very interested in science and its kind of applications, but also just kind of like the theory of how to gain knowledge objectively using evidence. And that was something that I kind of became really passionate about. So that was kind of that. But in my senior year of high school, I took AP statistics. Was really lucky that my high school offered that. Not every high school does. But I really enjoyed it. And by that point, I was like, okay, I want to study this in college. Um, so, and from there, it was just kind of the blueprint was just like go to college, get a degree in statistics, and then get as much baseball experience as I could. A lot of people get that baseball experience by playing.
Hmm.
Either playing like D1, D2, D3, JUCO, whatever, while also kind of teaching themselves how to code or learning statistics. So that's kind of what I did, and then I just applied to as many jobs as I could. Probably before I was really competitive for any of them. But I learned a lot from those processes. And by the time, I was done with college, I was in a much better spot. So I mean, it's like, it's hard to create a blueprint after I kind of already played out the whole thing. Obviously sitting right here, I'm just like, I would follow the same blueprint that I already did,
For sure.
So yeah.
For sure, makes sense. Um, Someone else asked Ethan, how do you see your work changing over the course of the season? So, obviously you're just getting started. You said week 4. There's these certain like landmarks over the course of the season that we observe as fans, whether it's the trade deadline or whatever the case may be. Do you see
Yeah.
your work or foresee your work changing over that time, or do you think that your projects are going to exist pretty independently of structures over the course of the season?
Yeah, so the front office projects, especially for analysts, from what I've gathered, they are pretty time dependent, not necessarily time dependent, but like um, they do kind of ebb and flow with the massive events of the season. So when I first started, there was really not a ton going on because I started on February 1st, and like that's not really an active time in the baseball season. Um, but there was a little bit of a jump when spring training began. I'm anticipating there's going to be a large spike in activity when the season starts. Every department is different, so the departments that deal with player development are probably going to be really active during the season, especially the minor league season. The departments having to do with like amateur scouting is probably going to be um, like more active leading up to the MLB draft in July. So and then we have another department that has to do with essentially which players do we want to trade for is a big project that they do. So that's that's going to be active right before the trade deadline. So every department has kind of this calendar that they're working off of. And I think it really depends on like which department you're in to, as like which time are you going to be really active. But I don't think that's, I don't think that that's news. I think that that makes sense for most, baseball people. They're following their own baseball calendar.
For sure, makes sense. Ethan, last question that someone wanted to know. Obviously you're kind of just starting out your journey in a baseball front office, and where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years down the road?
Yeah, I mean that's a big question. It's interesting because I spent so much time in the last probably 5 years wanting to get to this point, and now that I'm have a job that I wanted, it's like, what do you do next? I think people talk a lot about getting your first job out of college, and people don't talk as much about kind of the intermediate like next steps. Your mid to late 20s. Like I kind of don't really even know. Assuming that I get to stay in baseball past this year, I would love to just kind of keep working my way up the ladder. I think um, the more the more senior members are always gonna have more fun. I feel like they're going to just be more established and have kind of a louder voice in the decision making process. With any team. So I would love to do that. I think the end goal would probably be to be like the director of like an analytics department. Um, I haven't really had the opportunity to be in many like leadership roles outside of being like outside of Cal Poly baseball. But I think that's something that I would want to do eventually is be in a leadership role and kind of be able to call the shots. I think a lot of people in this field end up, a lot of analysts want to be the director of analytics, right? But I think that would be really cool at some point if that ever happens.
Cool. Well, Ethan, we are super appreciative of your time. Thank you for your insights and for sharing your journey with us. I know that everyone at Twins Daily and everyone in Twins territory is wishing you the best of luck for the forthcoming season with the organization. So we hope to catch up with you again soon. And thanks again so much for joining us today.
All right. Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
For sure. Have a great night.
You too.